You can start, Emma. Sorry. Thank you. Welcome everybody to the first of the Capital Programme Committees of 2021. We're on Thursday, the 28th of January at 2 o'clock. The meeting will be recorded so that it will be accessible to the public after the meeting is concluded. Could all members keep their microphones and their cameras off unless you're invited to speak. Okay, we'll just move straight on to the agenda. Notification of urgent business, there at 1.1 there is none. Determination of exempt business at 2.1, there is nothing currently on the agenda. 3.1, declarations of interest. Is there any declarations of interest? I'm not seeing any indications. Okay, thanks very much, everybody. There's no request for deputations at 4.1. If we could go on to the minutes at 5.1 on pages 5 to 10. If I could ask on page 5, Mr. White, could you just give us an update on item 2?
Sorry, item 2.
That was the other authorities that you'd written.
Sorry, yes. I've written to all the local authorities that still have council housing, so excluding Glasgow and Dumfries. To date, I mean, that was pre-Christmas. I still haven't had any responses, so I was going to give them till the end of the month and then follow that up with a further email.
Thank you very much, Mr. White. I think everybody's rather bogged down with COVID at the moment, so I think it's understandable why there hasn't been a response, but thank you. Could I ask also on page 6 at item 5 at bullet point 1, it's got that you are going to liaise with the Officer of Strategic Place Planning in response to the bus.
And you'll be aware, you won't be aware, will be the City Growth and Resources Committee agenda papers are now out, and you'll see there's an item on that committee which relates to the bus infrastructure and the bus fund. Excellent.
And the final item that I have is on page 10 under item number 11. Again, there was for yourself, Mr. White, to liaise with the Chief Officer of Education.
I have spoken to the Chief Officer of Education, and at this point in time, I'm leaving the Chief Officer to concentrate on the issue of the sort of full lockdown and the impact on schools and the opening of schools. And I'm afraid we don't have the resources to come back with anything more detailed at this stage. Okay, no problem, Mr. White. Has anybody got any questions on the minute, or can we accept that they are an accurate record? Okay, thank you. Moving on to agenda item 6.1, which is the planner. Could I just at this point suggest to Mr. Wilson, we've obviously got most of the items on the agenda that were expected today, but for the March committee, could I ask that you bring an interim report on the art gallery? I appreciate it'll probably have to be a confidential report in the confidential section. Could you just confirm, Mr. Wilson?
Yes, I can certainly do that, convener, and as you've intimated, it would have to be in private session.
Okay, thanks very much. Any further questions on the planner? Councillor Nicholl.
Thank you very much, convener. It was just to actually ask a quick question about one of the projects that is not scheduled for today's meeting. It will be on again in March, and that's the Tory Primary School one, if I may. Just a quick update request.
Your question is anything particular?
Yeah, it was just to ask, obviously at the last meeting, there was an update provided regarding progress with the final removal of the asbestos and the commencement of the demolition work. So it was just to really ask if there was any further update on that. Thank you.
Okay. Mr. Wilson?
Through the convener. Yes, as a general update, committee will be aware we've had issues with asbestos, but what I can say that the asbestos removal has been going reasonably well lately. It's coming to the point where I would envisage actually seeing the actual demolition works commencing next month. taking that on board, I would like to think that the actual school demolition works would be complete in round about May. And obviously we'd be looking at an overlap for the start of the new school construction. So I'd expect to start maybe in June for the actual new school construction.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Convener.
Okay, thank you. Okay, now if there's nothing further, I'm not seeing any other hands. Okay, we'll move on to agenda items. Agenda item 8.1, which is the new housing programme delivery update. Sorry, Councillor Nicholl, is that a historic hand, or are you up your hand up already? No, thank you.
Apologies, sorry.
That's all right, no problem. First of all, I'll just invite questions. The reports, obviously, they're giving us the outline of where we are with the housing build. Has anybody got any questions for officers on it? Councillor McClellan.
Thanks, Convener. Just a wee question on 8.1 3.3. I know that we're now at 99 through the buyback scheme, which is up from 90 in the September report, I think it was. It was just to ask Mr. Wilson, how many of the 2,000 would you expect to achieve through the buyback scheme? First of all.
Through the convener, if I could maybe start, and maybe Mr. Booth can maybe come back on as well. I'd like to update the committee saying, yes, it says 99 there on the report, but I must offer my apologies. The actual number that I have found out is actually 153. That's where it is, I understand, is currently. I don't know if Mr. Booth can add to that going forward.
Okay, Mr. Booth.
I think the question, Convener, was around the target for buybacks. Obviously, that, despite those numbers, it's obviously been constrained a bit in the last year in terms of what we've been able to do as the property market is shut down at times. But we'd certainly hope to get up to 200 units through that mechanism.
Okay, excellent. Thank you, Councillor McClellan.
Yeah, thanks. Thank you to Mr. Wilson for that update. You know, that's obviously even more welcomed that there's 153 instead of just 99. That's grand. My next question was going to be: is there more in the pipeline? But I think that's obviously probably been answered by the previous responses. So I'll happily stop there.
Okay, Mr. Booth, did you want to add anything additional? No.
Really, just to say there are many in the pipeline at the moment in terms of applications that the team are working through. It's a bit restricted what we can do at the moment, and obviously we're not able to buy every application that's made to us in terms of affordability and meeting key criteria, but there's certainly a lot of interest in the scheme.
Excellent, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, I have Councillor McCrae.
Thank you, Convener. Just in regards to item 3.14 with terms to Granite Hill site, I noticed there is a brief outline of this, but as this has now been on the agenda for some time now, I'm just wondering when we're going to sort of see spades in the ground sort of side of it to try and get this site moved on.
Okay. Mr. Wilson and Mr. Booth. Mr. Booth, put your hand up. Thank you.
Sorry, yes, I'm happy to pick that up. The Granite Hill site is partly in council ownership, and there's an adjoining site in third party ownership. So the conversations around the heads of terms are with the third party to see if we can get a more comprehensive scheme, and we'd hope to bring the detail of that forward through the budget process, which is where we would secure the funding to take forward that development.
Thank you, Mr. Booth. Councillor McCrae, are you content?
Yeah, thanks very much.
Okay, Councillor Lumsden.
Yeah, thanks, Convener. It's just really following on from the question Councillor McClellan had asked. I was just wondering if Mr. Booth can answer whether, in terms of the multi-stories being, listed, has that, has that meant any more have came forward, or is it probably too early to know whether that's had any impact on that?
Mr. Booth?
I think people are still digesting the decision by Historic Environment Scotland, including ourselves. So I can't say there's been a huge increase in the last week, but I've not specifically looked into it. But my gut feel is it's probably too early to determine what the impact of that will be.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Lumsden. Councillor McClellan, is that a historic hand, or have you got another question?
As a wee follow-up in terms of what Councillor Lumpton was asking, because I think it's actually quite interesting in terms of buybacks. You know, there's obviously a lot of properties that are in multi-stories that are for sale at reasonable value. Given the status, would that make them less desirable now for the council to then acquire, given the likely much greater cost of maintenance and the like moving forward? Mr. Booth, sorry, I appreciate that's very speculative, but
So we have acquired a number of properties within multi-storey buildings so far. That remains an area that we will look at. We will need to reappraise our financial model around that. There is an impact in terms of the grants that are available for buildings that don't meet certain criteria. Some of the multis are challenged around meeting that criteria for grant. And there is an impact that the market values may alter based on listings, but that's probably speculative at this point as well. The key points of the policy, we are trying to buy properties predominantly back with the council we're a majority owner, to try and consolidate our ownership in terms of the ease of carrying out common repairs and having stock that we can easily manage and maintain. So the multis certainly hit those categories of the council being a majority owner and stock that we know how to look after well. So hopefully that answers the question.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Mr. Booth. Thank you.
Any further questions, members? I'm not seeing it. Councillor McClellan, I'm assuming that's not another question, is it just your hand still up? Yeah, thank you. Okay, so if there's no further questions, the recommendations are laid out on page 13 at 2.1, which is to note the progress to deliver the programme of social housing sites across the city, which is referred to in Appendix 1. Again, I would just like to thank the efforts that everyone's going to, because I appreciate that, particularly under the COVID situations, that everyone's working at, both third party and our officers. I absolutely understand the pressure that brings. So I'd just like to, obviously on behalf of, I'm sure, all councillors, thank everyone for all your efforts on trying to get our new housing programme delivery up, progress continued. So thank you all very much. Okay, so we're agreed on that recommendation. If we could then move to item 8.2, which is on page 23, and that's the Summerhill New House Building Progress Report. Again, I'll just invite questions to start with. Any questions? Councillor McCrae.
Thank you, Convener. It's just in regards to the management of risk. It sort of ties in with this agenda item and all others in terms of the COVID-19 outbreaks or the pandemic as a whole. How are our officers sort of getting in contact with the developer sites themselves to make sure that all COVID-19 guidelines are adhered to make sure that there's no outbreaks directly on site with the workers that are on site?
Okay, thank you. Mr. Wilson?
Through the convener, basically all the contractors, whether it's a housing project or other construction project, they are taking measures with regard to working practices to meet the COVID requirements. I've been out there myself. As soon as you walk on site, they're taking temperatures, etc., where you're from, who you've been in contact with, that type of thing. They're running a very strict ship out there. However, it has to be accepted. There is always a risk. But I can assure you that the contractors are trying their damnedest best to try and keep it control and make sure there isn't any COVID outbreaks on their site.
Mr. White, did you want to add anything, or?
No, it's just, I mean, Mr. Wilson's kind of covered it. I mean, it's really just to sort of say we continue to work with all our contractors and try and offer any assistance we can, but also just making them aware that from a council perspective, we are obviously keeping an eye on the sites to make sure that we're comfortable with what they're doing. But obviously, at the end of the day, it is their responsibility. It's not the council. So it's just that final point I was wanting to make.
Okay, thank you, Mr. White. Councillor McCrae, you content with your answer?
Yeah, I'm happy with that. Thank you very much for your answer.
Okay, again, any further questions? I'm not seeing any hands. Okay, recommendations are on page 23 at 2.1, which is to note the progress achieved in the housing project at Summerhill. I think, again, I would just re-emphasise that, you know, people are working extremely hard to keep the sites open and functioning under very difficult conditions. And I know certainly on my regular updates with Mr. Wilson that, you know, our officers are certainly keeping a close eye on both the quality of work, but also that PPE is being distributed where it's needed, and that COVID restrictions are being, you know, or COVID matters are being considered very, very carefully. So can we just agree that, please?
Agreed.
Thank you.
Agreed.
Right, moving on to page, oops, there's a load of pages, pictures there, which hopefully you find useful. But on page 35, on agenda item 8.3, we have the Wellheads Road New Building Housing Programme. Again, I'll just invite questions. No questions on this one. The recommendations then are laid out on page 35 at 2.1, which is to note the progress achieved in the procurement of the new council housing project at Wellheads Road. Again, you know, if we can agree those, but again, I would echo the same sentiments. I think it's remarkable the efforts that everyone's going to make sure that this appears to be at current stage ahead of schedule. So that's very welcome, and I'm sure the people that will be living in all of our council housing will be extremely excited to see that we're still moving ahead with the project. So if there's no questions and it's agreed, I'll move on to next agenda item 8.4.
Agreed.
Okay, thank you. Right, 8.4, we have again another exciting project. It's the Early Learning Centre Programme Progress Report. That's a bit of a mouthful. It's on page 47. Questions, members? Again, I'm not seeing any. Oh, Councillor Lumsden.
Yeah, thank you, convener. It was not so much a question, but more of a comment. I live across the road from one of the sites that where a new nursery is being built, and you know, it's just I find it staggering that, you know, there's so much work being put into this whole project, and that's just one site. And then when you see this report, you know, we're talking about 30 sites. So it's just really to commend the officers, you know, for all the work it's been put into this project right across the city. Although it's lots of smaller sites, it is a huge scale when you think of all the work it's been done, and really just to commend them and thank them for all their efforts.
Yeah, thank you, and I would absolutely echo that. And it seems a bit of a theme, Councillor Lumsden. I live next door to one that's being constructed at Cooter Primary, so we're in a similar boat. But I think what we have to recognise as well, some of it is new build, some of it is redevelopment, some's expansion. So there's an awful lot going on. Councillor Lang.
Thanks very much, convener. It's just to add to the comments that you've made yourself, and indeed Councillor Lumsden. I have one in my area that's currently under construction, which is a new build, which is happening at pace. But I've also had the opportunity to look at the new nursery that is being developed down at the old Woodlands site, and I think what's so impressive about the project is how sympathetically we are managing to adapt both older buildings to meet the needs of our youngest learners, you know, and indeed the curriculums that we'll be bringing forward. But what I've been impressed with is the use of both the indoor and outdoor space, because I think we all realise that outdoor learning is a hugely important aspect, and I think that's pleasing of the the project that's coming forward, you know, particularly with those outdoor facilities, if parents want to have that totally outdoor at Duthie Park and things, which we've not really seen before. You know, I think that's hugely impressive, and hopefully both parents and children in Aberdeen who will benefit from the new facilities will recognise that once we get up and running in the summer.
Absolutely, couldn't agree more, Councillor Lang. Councillor Lumsden, can I just check, is that a historic hand? A legacy hand, as they call it, or is another question? No. Okay. Well, if there's no questions, again, the recommendations are laid out on page 47 at 2.1 and 2.2. 2.1 is to note the early learning and childcare expansion programme of works forms part of the overall Aberdeen City Council capital plan. And 2.2, note the progress made with the overall delivery of the project in lieu of COVID-19 pandemic. We agree?
Agreed.
Excellent. Okay, again, please, Mr. Wilson, Mr. Kempsey, who's put the paper together, please pass on our thanks to everyone involved in this, because we know it's not an easy project to manage, and it's really impressive that we've continued at the pace we are. So just thank you to everyone, Mr. Wilson. As I say, team's carrying out an amazing job.
I'll certainly pass that on to the team convener. I can, excuse me, I can take very little credit for this. It's really down to the team themselves. I mean, my drive is to keep pushing it forward, and I do push them forward. They can testify to that. But I'm very impressed with the way the team's been taking this whole programme forward. And as the committee's already alluded to, it is a substantial amount of work, and it's got its tentacles right across the city. And we're just trying to get them out there for the benefit of the citizens as quickly as we can. Thank you.
Well, it's only one element of the capital programme, so I know both yourself and Mr. White and Mr. Booth have all got your hands full with delivering the capital programme, so thank you all very much. And I can't believe it's only 14:22, and that concludes the business on the agenda today. Thank you all very much for your attendance, and we'll look forward to seeing you all again soon, some of you at City Growth, I'm sure, next week. Thank you all very much. Thank you.
Thank you, convener.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Sorry, switch off the recording, yes.